Hello, BookTube. So I'm here with another video. I thought it would be a good idea to follow up on yesterday's momentum, right? Just to immediately put out another video, and hopefully that will make me feel like I'm really back into the swing of things. Whereas if I were to have put out yesterday's video and then waited a week, just based on whim, maybe next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I won't be in the mood. The feeling will have passed, something like that will have happened. But this way, if I can really capture this moment, maybe it'll be sustainable then. And because I haven't made videos in so long, and because I took all my old content, virtually all my old content, going back to 2018, 2019, I forget when exactly I started this, and threw it all into Mount Doom, I thought it would be good to do a video that would sort of reintroduce myself because this channel has been sitting dormant. I suspect most of you aren't new. It's probably I saw in the last day I have like 10 new subscribers since I made that video, so there's a small handful, but this will maybe be more of a reintroduction, right, than a proper introduction. But if more people do start coming over, then it'll work as both. So anyhow, I thought doing tags was a good idea for that reason. Another small note: I am shooting this on my laptop. The video I did yesterday, I did on my phone. I just wanted to try this to see how it worked. I was setting up my phone to do this, and I couldn't get the aspect ratio how I wanted, and I sort of like the way this is capturing everything. I don't know if it's too wide or not. But then also, I don't know how different the audio and video quality is going to be. And if it's worse, then maybe I won't do it again, or I'll have to find some other solution. Maybe if I sustain this, get some kind of cheap clip-on microphone like you see the influencers use. But this is an experiment also. Um, so let me know down in the comments how this turns out. The main thing I'm really worried about, since the driving force of this channel has never been production quality um, or personality. I don't really know what the driving force of this channel ever was. But as I'm saying, the one thing I'm worried about is not looking at the camera, just a little bit of professionalism, for lack of a better word. I'm going to be distracted by myself in the video. And who wouldn't be distracted by me, right? But since that's where things are moving on the screen, I don't know if it's going to be weird if I keep looking down as opposed to up at the camera. So that's one thing I'm worried about. We'll just see how it goes. Okay, with that throat clearing, if you'll excuse me, let's go into this tag. The tag I chose is the Reading Tics Tag by Kevin Toll Reads. I just thought this was a recent tag that I saw floating around that would work as a good introduction, and I really like the prompt, so that's why I grabbed onto it. Also, by the way, Kevin, whose channel I've heard of just through other people that I watch, I finally sat down and watched his videos, and they're fantastic. That guy is a dude, as they say, or in the Midwest, he's a guy I could stand to have a beer with in a garage. I think that's another way to say it. I really like the cut of his jib. I hadn't really watched his videos before, but before doing this tag, I thought it was only appropriate to binge some, and I did, and they were wonderful. And he is close to 1,000 subscribers. I think he's 20 away now. There's plus one. I think he's at 980 now. It was 979, and I subscribed. So go check it out if you haven't. By the perverse nature of me having done this for a while, stopped, and then coming back, and him being comparatively new and putting out a ton of content, I shouldn't, but I do have more subscribers. So if there's anybody who doesn't happen to overlap, at least go take a look. He seems like a great guy, and I like the videos that I saw, so I'll keep watching. Anyhow, he came out with this tag called the Reading Tics Tag, and I really think after going through the prompts and watching a couple versions of this that you could do a part two or maybe even a part three. There's so many other things that came to mind, but um, even broader tics too. It doesn't have to be reading tics. It could be bookish tics. So how you organize your shelves and things like that. The possibilities with this are pretty numerous, I think. And the set here though is a great start. So I guess I have to get going at some point. Let's start at the first one. Do you only read at a specific time of day? No, I don't. I read when I can, and it depends on the day what that looks like. When I read, is really dictated by what my schedule looks like that day, and my schedule isn't super consistent. My week exists in like three tranches. One would be the weekend, obviously, and then there's two within the week, although they're not necessarily all sequential days. I consider one to be in office days, and then other days to be work from home days. So my main job is, just a corporate job, and I go into the office on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and then I'm home Monday, Thursday, Friday. Now, I also work a part time job on uh, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. So you can see that Tuesday, Wednesday is just a black hole in the middle of my week. I'm up at 5:30. I like to get to the office a little before 7 or right at 7 because that way I can be done at 3:30, and then I walk over to the gym. I work out, I do my daily workout, and then I work my evening job. And so the only real reading time that I have on Tuesday and Wednesdays are over lunch breaks, or my lunch break, excuse me, there's only one, over my lunch break or on the bus. And then the other days where I do work from home, if they're slower, then I can read, a little bit during the workday, also over my lunches. Because I wake up early, I don't have to worry about taking the bus in. I have some time in the morning. Um, some of those days, or one of those days, only one of those days, I work the evening job. So on Monday and Friday, I do have the evenings as well to read. And so those days are a lot more productive in terms of page count and whatnot. And then you have the weekends, which is totally open because I have no life. So I tend to get plenty of reading done on the weekends that I really do, I think, make up for a lot of lost time. Not completely, of course, and it does bother me those 2 days when I'm not reading. It is sort of like missing a workout. Those of you who do work out every day, if you miss one for whatever reason, you just feel off. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays, when I'm not getting my usual amount of reading in, I just feel off. So those days do really bother me. Um, so a long answer to a short question, obviously. Uh, Although I will just say, just to wrap it up, if I have a preference, it's in the early hours of the morning. I am very much a morning person. I like waking up and reading right away when I'm mentally fresh, before other people are up. The world is almost quieter than it is late at night when people might be out going to the bars and doing things like that. I really enjoy reading during those early hours. So that's my favorite time to read, anyhow. So, question number two, going on. Do you prefer to read in your work or everyday clothes, or are you partial to reading in PJs or comfy clothes? So I read whenever I can fit it in. So I read just in whatever I'm wearing. I don't put that much thought into it. If I'm on the bus, if I'm in the office, I'm in work clothes. It just is what it is. I don't put that much thought into it unless I'm at home. If I'm at home, I do put thought into it, and I definitely do have a preference. I basically want to be as comfortable as possible, so I'll be in an oversized hoodie. Usually, this one actually, which I bought at the Book Barn in Niantic, and I bought it a size too large, so I like to wear this or a couple other oversized hoodies that I have, and then sweatpants or a pair of like workout shorts or comfortable shorts. So I definitely have a preference there. Also, so I'm going to be in comfortable clothes, probably on this couch or in bed, and in as corporeally compromised a position as possible. I'm definitely a sloucher, so I like to be comfortable. Um, number three. Number three is, what is your favorite reading spot? Oh, I just sort of mentioned that. Couch, chair, bed, outdoors, or somewhere else. Let me first say here where I don't like to read. He lists the chair and outdoors. I don't like reading outdoors. There's bugs outdoors. There's other people outdoors who are immensely distracting. And the sun, it moves, so the shade moves, and either the shade is in a bad spot or the sun is in your eyes. All of that adds up to being immensely distracting, and so I don't read outside. If I want to go outside, I'll open the window for reading anyway. And then in terms of a chair, again, I like to slouch, so I don't usually read in a chair. I do have a reading nook with a chair in it, and it is an oversized chair, so I can sort of lean against one arm of the chair and throw my legs over the other. So that is one way I guess I do read in a chair. Or if I have something I'm cooking and it can sit for a few minutes, I'll go sit in that chair because it's close to the kitchen, and I'll read a bit of a magazine or something like that. But I don't sit in that for long sessions, let's say. Now here, I mentioned this in the previous question, I do like reading on the couch or in bed, and that does depend on what time of day it is. I also mentioned that I prefer reading in the morning, especially the early hours. So what I'll do is I'll get up, I'll make coffee, but I'll go back to bed and I'll keep reading my book. Uh, Partly because that's really comfortable, so why wouldn't I? But then also, I was probably reading at night in bed the, the day previously, so the book that I was reading is already on the nightstand. So that happens naturally. It happened this morning too. I read in bed for like 3 or 4 hours, which was excessive, but I did still. And then if it's a work from home day, of course, there's always that qualification. And I'm working out here and I don't need to have my monitors because I'm not doing that intensive work. I will work from the couch. And so if it's a quiet day, I'll also read from the couch. But if it's the weekend, so like today, once I'm up properly, I'm showered, changed, and all that, and it's the afternoon, I just read from the couch. In fact, probably 80% of my reading is done from right here. And then in the evening, when it's time to go to bed, I bring in my books and finish reading in bed. Um, and so if you can see here, this couch, the way I have it set up, is I've got a couple blankets. There's another one under here. Plenty of pillows. I lean against these. And then I also have pillows here. So actually, usually I have four. Usually I'll go 4 pillows, organize them just right so I can lean against them. And then I'll take an extra pillow that I'll put on my stomach or my lap and I'll rest the book on there while I'm on these pillows. That tends to be how I do it. And once I'm stuck in that position, it's pretty hard to move me. um, so that's question 3. Number 4 is, do you snack while reading, or is it a no-go? Kevin said in his video that he can't even recall a time that he's ever snacked reading. I'm glad he said that because I can't either. So no, I don't, and I guess this is a no-go. Partly because it's never occurred to me to do it until I started watching BookTube, and people would set out crackers or cookies with their tea while they would read. But I had never thought of it prior to that. But also partly because I don't really snack. I inhale food in great quantities, like some kind of monster in a horror novel, maybe, or from a different planet in a science fiction novel. I inhale food and in great quantities. I don't really snack, so it wouldn't apply to me anyway. But then also, and I think this is partly why it never occurred to me. I had a teacher in high school, a biology teacher, I think it was, and she always said you can't multitask. And if somebody says they can, they're lying to you. So you can't read while you're snacking or while you're drinking, right? So it just doesn't make sense to me as well. So this is, I guess, a no go for me. Number 5, do you or have you ever peeked at the end of a book, or do you avoid spoilers at all costs? Um, so no to both, I guess I would say, although I also have to note that this question definitely has a fiction bias, right? If I'm sitting down and reading about World War II, I don't get to the point where FDR dies and think, oh my gosh, what a crazy plot twist, right? This is something restricted to fiction. And another possibility, if this tag was extended, you could loop in more nonfiction oriented questions that have to do with I don't know, reading footnotes, sources, annotations, that kind of thing. I'm not sure, but anyhow, no, I don't. No, I don't peek at the end of a book. I just start from the beginning and read through to the end, and I'm not super worried about uh, learning something essential about the book before I get to it. And I realized this was true years ago when I was reading Anna Karenina, because I did learn something essential about it later on, and it didn't ruin it for me at all. And then I said, well, you know what? It's just a matter of how well it's done. That's all that really matters, and I stopped worrying about it. Whereas before that, I think I did say yes, just kind of as a default answer because it seems like the obvious thing to say, but I don't think I had really run into a situation like that before. And Anna Karenina is my favorite novel, so clearly I can't care about it all that much. I was trying to think of exceptions to this, and some classics did come to mind. So if I'm going to read Homer, or the first time I read Homer, for example, I boned up on a lot of history for that and read about the book, so there wasn't much in there that was surprising to me. But then also with some other classics, whether it's in Norton Critical Editions or Penguin or Oxford Classics, I've had a tendency to read introductions before I read the book itself. Um, or a lot of times with the Nortons that come with the essays in the back, I would read those and then read the book. Because again, I just realized I didn't care about spoilers or anything. And I enjoyed doing that because it gave me things to think about while I was reading the novel. So um, recently, I reread Huckleberry Finn, right? Because James came out, and so I wanted to read that before I read James. But I read all the essays in there beforehand, before I went into Huckleberry Finn, just because I wanted to be thinking about what critics had been talking about as I went through the novel. Or maybe a better example would be something like Bleak House. The first time I read Bleak House, I read Terry Eagleton's insufferable introduction in that before I went through the book itself, but I didn't really care. And the reason that can be fun, though, too, especially if it is something you haven't read before, you now have, in a way, someone to read it with. So Eagleton loves that book, and he read it in a particular way. So I thought, okay, here's someone's who enthusiastic about it and has a point of view. He's making an argument about the book, or some arguments about the book. What am I going to think about those things? They're in my mind before I even go into the book. So as I'm reading the narrative, I'm counting the things that are in favor of his arguments about the book, but I'm also keeping an eye out for things that work against it. And so by the end of the book, I have someone else's opinion that I can compare to my own, and that's a fun and useful thing to do, especially if you don't have a community like BookTube. So um, those are some exceptions where I did intentionally read about the book before getting into the book. Um, but that's not the norm, I think, and I don't think that's the motivation behind this question. Okay, so going on here, where are we at? We are at 6. Do you prefer first person or third person narrative, or do you care? I think I prefer third person. You know, if I open a novel and the narrator says it was a foggy London day and I was walking down Fleet Street, I just read that, and maybe it's because I'm a crank, but I just want to grab the narrator by the collar and throw him off the cliffs of Dover. Or in the River Thames, I guess would be closer. But you see what I mean? It just annoys me, I think. But that could be either because I am a crank or simply I haven't read many novels that are done in the first person well. So that's probably where that preference comes from. I'd like to think I'm open minded enough to like it if it's done well and not just be prejudiced, but that's tended to be the case for me. So, barring additional data, I'll just say I'm pretty sure that I do prefer the third person. Okay, so number 7. Do you read dedications, author notes, acknowledgements, or do you skip these? I read everything in the book, start to finish, pretty much. Um, and the thing is, though, these can be informative too, especially in the case of nonfiction. If you look at the people they thank, if you look at the foundations that they think prior to going to the book, that can sometimes inform what you might be seeing. So it's interesting as well. I try not to skip anything. Number 8, do you have a favorite reading beverage? The Tears of the Author I'm reading, maybe. But no, I don't have a favorite reading beverage. This sort of does go back to the question about a reading snack. I don't really plan on drinking something when I'm eating. I don't sit down at night, for example, with a book and say, oh, golly, I need my tea with this too. I don't really think about it. Now, it does happen incidentally, for example, in the morning. I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago, where I'll get up, make coffee, bring the coffee back to bed, and read in bed with it. But even then, that presents a problem, which happened this morning too. I'll get pulled into the book, I'll forget about the coffee, and then at a break between chapters, I'll go to sip the coffee and realize it's gone cold, so I have to go throw it in the microwave or just say to heck with it, right? I'll only have gotten through half the cup. So that's probably the closest thing I have to having like a reading drink. Otherwise, I always have a water bottle by me. Here it is. I always have this, and so what happens often is I'm sitting here on the couch reading, and then there'll be another natural break in the book, right between chapters, or maybe I finish the book, and I'll look up and realize I'm super dehydrated, so I'll just guzzle like half this thing, and then that's annoying because 20 minutes later you have to go to the bathroom. But again, there it's just the drink that's with me while I'm reading, and I always have a water bottle with me. It's not a planned reading drink. Um, Although here I made another note. I did I did think of another situation that doesn't happen but has happened twice, and that's the case of wine. And I thought of this because Kevin mentioned that he's not a drinker, so that's not something that applies to him. And I don't drink a whole lot anymore. Although when I drink a whole lot, and I don't go out like I used to. So sometimes I'll find myself, well, more than sometimes recently, but sometimes I'll find myself in on a Friday or Saturday night uh, alone, and I'll have done a whole lot of reading during the day, and then I think maybe I should do something else. So what I'll do is I'll drink some wine, keep reading, and then when the wine starts to affect me, I'll put the book down and then I'll watch something, or maybe I'll read Calvin and Hobbes comic strips instead, and then I'll go to bed after a little bit. I've done that 2 or 3 times, and it was fun. But the problem with that is I work out 6 days a week, so the only day I can really do that is Saturday, since Sunday is my off day. But then also, I don't watch much, and I tend to have impatience with watching things. So I'll get 20 minutes into something, get bored, and then either start reading again or go to bed instead. So that never lasts long either. But then also, drinking affects your sleep, and I'm sort of obsessive right now about my sleep because it affects my workouts. So I just don't do that very often. The couple times I have, it was a lot of fun, but it just as a one-off thing. So it doesn't really work in the question. But that was just another situation I thought of. So no, I don't have a favorite reading beverage. The most common one is water and sometimes coffee, basically. Number 9, how do you decide what to read next? TBR, mood, goals, random choice. Um, so I tend to read on themes. A good example would be earlier this year or late last year. I don't remember anymore. I read like 4 books in a row on the Battle of Monte Cassino, and I enjoyed doing that because I can compare them, and that's just a way I like to read. Sometimes I'll do that with fiction, or I'll want to do it with fiction. Um, so an example isn't coming to mind right now, but say a historical novel about an event or figure. We'll find 2 or 3 that have to do with the same event or figure. Okay, how did their characterization difference uh, uh, differ? Excuse me, about Eleanor of Aquitaine. Okay, that can be a fun thing to do. So I tend to read on themes, and not just because of comparison. A lot of times it's things like footnotes driving me to another thing on the subject. This part of the book was really interesting. They cited a source 6 times, and I think, okay, well, I better read that. I better read that. Or maybe I have read it already, and I'll think, oh, I have that on the shelf, actually. I should revisit that. That happens all the time, too. So I tend to read on a theme. And then when I get to a point where I've read, like 3 or 4 is extremely excessive, I think, but say 3 books on one subject, I'll say that's enough, whether I really want to go on or not, and I'll abruptly break that, and there I will try intentionally to go to something completely different. So oftentimes, if it was 3 books of nonfiction on the same subject or rough subject, I'll go to fiction instead, and that will tend to be, since I don't read as much fiction, that will tend to be something on the shelf I haven't read yet and has maybe been sitting there for a while, or I've been thinking about it. I'll say, okay, now's a good time to reach for that. That's a lot of time how that happens. And then goals here is also mentioned. I do have some loose reading plans. Uh, they probably work out to about 2 books, maybe 3 books a month. So an example right now is I'm working through all the single volume histories of World War II. Yep, I know. And so I have to do, I think, one a month and then two in 3 or 4 months or something like that. And so that is worked in, and I'll say, okay, well, whether you like it or not, you have to read a World War II book this month. It's the last week of the month. Put it down, or read one of those. Not a World War II book, because that could be anything, but a single volume overview of the war. So you have to sit down and read it to hit your goal. That does happen, but that's a comparatively small proportion of my reading. Um, and then here, okay, well, we're at the end. It says tag some others, so I won't, because I haven't been reaccepted or properly re-entered into booktube. But then also, this was put out, I think, I wrote down anyway, February 4th, so it is getting a little old, and I thought this would just be a good thing to a good tag to answer as part of a reintroduction of myself. So there we go. So again, that was Kevin Toll Reed's tag. I'll put the link to the original down below and the questions. So there we have 2 videos in 2 days. Who knows when the next one will be? Thanks, BookTube.